Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thank you for downloading the Why Factor from the BBC World Service. I'm Sandra Canthal, and as part of our Beyond Fake News season, I've been talking to fact-checkers from around the world to find out about the job they do and why they do it. On October 28th, Brazil elected a new president. It was a campaign marred by controversy and a flood of fake news. A small sample. One rumour suggested that the candidate Fernando Haddad was going to provide daycare centres with erotic baby bottles to combat homophobia. And there was a conspiracy theory suggesting that the winning candidate, Jair Bolsonaro, staged his own stabbing on the campaign trail. One election observer described the extent of the spread of fake news in the world's fourth largest democracy as an unprecedented phenomenon.
During the campaign, we saw two countries. We saw a country presented by Fernando Haddad and the country presented by Jair Bolsonaro. And the real country was right in the middle, the country based in data and information and facts.
The American statesman Daniel Patrick Moynihan liked to say, "Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts." But in today's world of information overflow and partisan echo chambers, this seems exactly what's on offer.
You can do anything you want on Facebook, on Twitter, on WhatsApp, whatever. You can say that 2 + 2 = 5. I don't care. But if I see that, I'm going to say that it's false. And I can prove that based on data. How about you? How are you going to prove that 2 + 2 = 5?
There is a growing network of specialist journalists determined to counter this flow of misinformation. Fact-checkers, often working in small teams attempting to separate the fact from fiction in our daily news feeds. It's not glamorous work, and in many countries it attracts threats from people who don't take kindly to being called wrong. I'm Sandra Canthal, and as part of the BBC World Service season Beyond Fake News, in this edition of The Why Factor, I'll be talking with fact-checkers from around the world to find out more about their work and why they risk their own safety to do it.
I am Cristina Tardáguila, and I'm the director of Agência Lupa, the fact-checking platform in Brazil.
The recent election left them struggling to keep pace with a daily bombardment of questionable stories.
In the first round of the campaign, we followed 50 politicians, and we have fact-checked 850 contents. So that is a lot for a team of 15 people.
Agência Lupa is a newswire service. They work with clients across the Brazilian media landscape who don't have fact-checking units themselves. They're also trying to popularize fact-checking by inviting users of their website to alert them to stories that call out for further scrutiny.
What we do as fact-checkers is we try to separate and differentiate what is actually trustable and what is not. What we are most pleased about is that some claims that were getting like false tags from Lupa, candidates changed their claims. They fixed that information. And there was this candidate, for example, he had a number of people without houses in Brazil, and he was misusing that information. And in the first debates, we gave him an exaggerated tag. And at the end of the last debate, he got the number right, and we actually saw he changed his information. This is like wonderful for us. This is why we work. We want the politicians to be accurate on what they say. So when we see the effect of fact-checking on their speech, we go crazy.
But that satisfaction comes at a price.
Since May, that means that it started before the election even, we've been receiving like death threats. And we have received that from either the super left or the super right. They don't like very much to be fact-checked. Between May and June, there was this week, the terrible week. We had about 5,000 tweets in 48 hours. In the middle of those tweets, there were all kinds of threats you can even imagine, right? Against the company itself, against my employees, against myself, against anything.
Brazil is more than one of a dozen countries working with Facebook's third-party fact-checking program, which began in 2016. The initiative has attracted criticism related to concerns about free speech, and Lupa's decision to join the partnership brought with it a wave of accusations and condemnation.
The far right and the far left, they both understood that maybe it could be a way of censorship, but it's not. So just to explain what happens, every day when I open my notebook, I have this dashboard that was created by Facebook. And what I see every day is what people have reported as false news. We take a look at what is most shared, and then we started working on those links. After we do our debunk, we published an article on our website, and we flag the reported link as false. Then Facebook decides that if I flag something as false, that content is reduced on the algorithm of the news feed. So these things started to happen in the Brazilian Facebook in May, and they were all very badly received. And there were some people saying that I would not see the next president of Brazil. I should take a look where I'm walking. But I try not to think about that. If I spend too much time thinking about this, I'm losing fact-checking. That's just not the point right now. We need to focus on what these guys are saying that is not right. And that's the most important thing right now.
Inevitably, fact-checking bothers people. If you're going to suggest that someone made an inaccurate statement, they will often take issue with it.
Alexis Mansalis is an economist by training. He started a fact-checking blog in his native Italy in 2012 and is now the leader of the Florida-based International Fact-Checking Network. At the moment, it has 62 independent members, which sell their services to clients or rely on donations to fund themselves. To join, they must also prove they are compliant with the network's code of principles.
The International Fact-Checking Network sounds like a pretty lame Marvel series. It is a collaborative alliance of fact-checking projects all over the world to help fact-checkers learn from one another, because fact-checkers are usually small organizations, and usually there aren't that many within the country. And so having an international network like this allows us to see what cool things other people are doing, what mistakes other people are doing, and imitate or avoid accordingly.
All the fact-checkers you'll hear in this program are members of the International Fact-Checking Network. One of its main goals is transparency, showing the world how they do their work, because the process of fact-checking is time-consuming, often tedious, and to many, bewildering.
A fact-checker's job is not rocket science. It's just really good, thorough reporting attached to primary sources. The one question fact-checkers pose themselves is, how do we know this? And they'll dig and dig and dig to find the best available evidence on a specific topic, and then make that evidence available to the public.
So if fact-checking is not glamorous work, and often it's not well paid, what lures people to what can seem like a thankless cause?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you're a fact-checker, you can feel like you're getting really deep into a detail that doesn't matter. At the same time, without a shared understanding of what the facts of a policy discussion are, we can't have democratic discourse.
And contributing to the scale of this problem is all of us. How much do you think about the news that is sent to you from friends and strangers alike?
A lot of the design of social media platforms makes it particularly hard for people to engage with content in a critical, reflective way.
David Rand is a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in America and the director of its Human Cooperation Laboratory.
A lot of the time you log into your social media accounts specifically because you want to be relaxing and kind of zoning out. Social media news is mixed in with all kinds of emotionally engaging content, like pictures of friends' weddings, cats doing crazy things, all of this stuff that engages the non-reflective, more emotional parts of your cognition. All of those things set you up to be less likely to carefully think about whether headlines are true or not when you see them in your newsfeed.
We try to strengthen the suspicion muscles in people's minds so they can be more resilient against all misinformation attempts, especially in Turkey, where media literacy is not very high compared to some other countries that I'm familiar with. I'm Baybars Örsek. I'm the founding executive director of Doğruluk Payı, a fact-checking website in Turkey.
Independent media organizations in Turkey are under constant threat. It's one of the most dangerous countries in the world to be a journalist. The government of Recep Erdogan routinely jails reporters and shuts down media outlets. Baybars Örsek started his fact-checking organization 4 years ago. Since then, they have fact-checked more than 1,000 statements from hundreds of Turkish politicians. They also run workshops around the country to teach the concept of fact-checking to future journalists.
Searching through data is complicated. You have to go through like sheets of Excels or pages of PDF files and everything, and this is not something that every individual has either an interest or time to do it. But as a fact-checker, we do the dirty work, I would say, and allow and encourage the people to use this information and pressure their elected officials.
You say that you're doing the dirty work by going through all these spreadsheets and digging through the facts, but you work in Turkey, which is a dangerous country to be a journalist. Are you concerned that if you call out some member of the government and say you are wrong and this is why you are wrong, there will be repercussions and they will be quite consequential?
This is actually a very common question, and I really understand the logic of this question, and it's one of our biggest source of unhappiness being operating since 2014. We have managed to stay free of any sort of direct or indirect pressure coming from the government or the pro-government circles. But this doesn't mean that working as a journalist in Turkey it's not walking in the park.
Baybars Örsek is not a member of any political party, and no one who works for his site is allowed to be either. He believes that neutrality and their careful use of language, they don't call something a lie on their website, but instead refer to a claim's basis of truth, has allowed them to be quite bold.
We fact-check a statement coming from the president. This statement coming from the president is not true. But as long as we have stayed away from using the terms like lie, I think this has enabled us to stay in a much more safe area.
You've fact-checked President Erdogan?
Yes, probably more than 100 times.
Really? And not once has he ever gotten cross about this?
This is really interesting because in one occasion we managed to have him retreat his statement and modify according to our finding just 3 days after our fact check being published. The president made a remark about OECD recognizing Turkey as a high income level country. This was probably due to a news reported in a pro-government newspaper, and that definitely triggered our attention. And then we went through the specific report, which was actually more than like 250 pages. And it was not publicly available, and we had to pay like around $50 to download it. And then we went through the whole document, and we found out that in just one specific section, the report had a couple of future scenarios. And in one of those future scenarios, Turkey is portrayed as a high income level country, but in 2030, if certain reforms have been implemented. So what we thought was the editor in the pro-government newspaper probably made a mistake during the translation, and the press people of the president misinformed the president about this issue. So we fact-checked the statement and we published it. And then just 2 or 3 days later, in a ceremony that the president himself attended, didn't apologize nor confess any wrongdoing in the statement, but changed the statement according to the findings. So this is a first-hand instance that we realize that our work is being taken seriously. This is probably one of the most exciting and, honestly, satisfying moments of our work.
There is a difference between checking the accuracy of a claim made by a specific source and debunking a story, which involves repudiating material like tweets, photographs, and videos, which often cannot be traced back to a specific source, let alone verified. David Rand, the MIT psychologist, has done studies to see how well people can rate the accuracy of different news headlines, especially partisan claims. What he found was that people more willing to engage in some critical thinking are more likely to be the ones who stop and say, hang on a minute.
We had them complete a measure of cognitive sophistication. It's called the Cognitive Reflection Test. It's a series of problems with intuitively compelling but wrong answers. So, for example,
Margaret's father has 3 daughters. The first 2 are named April and May. What's the third one's name?
And for most people, June comes immediately to mind, and you might just write it down, or you might stop and think for a minute and be like, oh, wait, no, the third daughter must be Margaret, because it said at the beginning it was Margaret's father. We found that people that were more likely to engage in reasoning were just better at telling true from false, regardless of whether it aligned with their ideology or not. And this suggests that it's not the case that people are just tricking themselves into believing content that they want to believe, but it suggests instead that people just aren't thinking carefully enough about the content that they're reading, and if they would think a little bit more, they could realize, that seems like it would be cool if that was true, but come on, that's probably not true.
So are you saying that in order for a fake news story to go viral, it depends on quite a lot of us being quite lazy?
Yeah, I think that's right. A lot of what helps misinformation spread and sort of take root and be believed is a kind of mental laziness.
But before you despair, David Rand thinks this is good news.
To me, actually, thinking that the result is about laziness rather than about extreme partisan thinking is encouraging, because if it's about extreme partisan thinking, then the only way that you're going to make things better is by getting people to be less partisan. And that seems extremely difficult. Whereas I think getting people to think a little bit more shouldn't be that hard.
And this is where fact-checkers step up, pointing out when we should think about a story that little bit harder. But the credibility of information we all rely on could further deteriorate if these independent journalists remain under constant threat.
We were visited by 2 plainclothes policemen from the city where we work. After one of our fact-checkers had filed a request for information from the police district.
Yvonne Chua is a journalism professor and co-founder of Verifiles, a not-for-profit media organization which has created a fact-checking initiative in the Philippines.
They dropped by and asked a lot of personal information about the reporter and other people working there. But one of the most serious threats that we have received would be shortly after we released to the public a video that compiled the numerous pieces of disinformation that came from the president, no less.
With 4 million drug addicts, it could cause the failure of my country.
The president she is referring to is Rodrigo Duterte, and his hostility towards journalists was in full display in 2016, when as president-elect, he asserted that reporters considered corrupt were legitimate assassination targets.
It's about an 8-minute video that actually shows how the president has been engaged in disinformation, that he has actually been fabricating figures on the war on drugs, that he has been untruthful about his university education, that he has actually been revising historical facts about the Marcoses.
Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos ruled the country as a dictatorship intermittently for decades.
So after we released the video, we actually received a threat from a troll who was engaged in patriotic trolling. He said that we were unpatriotic, we were ungrateful to a president who has done so much for the country. And he challenged us to a showdown. He said, let's have a duel. We have guns. Let's just wipe each other off the face of the earth.
You will not be surprised to learn that no one from Verifiles chose to take part in a duel with a troll. But it does bring up one obvious question. If this work provokes such alarming threats, why do it?
We have had a lot of role models in the past, especially journalists who dared defy governments or corrupt leaders in order to put out the truth. Many have died for it. Many have been jailed for that. And their sacrifices to restore press freedom and democracy in the Philippines are always at the back of our minds. We know that, of course, no story is worth dying for, but at the same time, we know that somehow our role as journalists and as fact-checkers is to give premium to the truth.
And it's that ethos which has drawn people to a gathering in London called MisinfoCon.
Fact-checking is the free speech response to misinformation. There are plenty of people around the world working on this problem.
And what's the general consensus? Are we doing well or badly?
The general consensus seems to be that it's quite complicated.
One of the conference participants is Mivan Bebika, head of automated fact-checking at FullFact, an independent charity in the UK.
So today at MisinfoCon, I am showing some of the tools that we're building for fact-checkers and journalists around the world. The first one that I'm showing is called Live, and it does live fact-checking. So you can give it a feed, and then it will take every single sentence and match it against a database of fact checks or against good data. And the second tool I'm showing today is called Trends. And what Trends does is it shows us every single time something that we know is false is being repeated. That's how you get a message out into the world. You repeat it many times.
Refuting false stories before people share them and put their own credibility on the line is vital. FullFact is planning to offer its tools to fact-checkers around the world within the next few months.
One of the things that technology is very good at is spotting repeat instances of things. And I really truly believe that if we share our technology and we work together in terms of spotting when things actually are repeated, even across borders, even across publications, then we can gather the insight that we need to try to do larger and larger actions to bring to light some of the problems that are happening, whether it's propaganda, whether it's economically incentivized, or whether it's someone just being wrong.
Fake news is a global problem, which is not going to go away. Taking advantage of the work of fact-checkers when we decide what to believe may be the best defense we have against the constant tide of misinformation. You've been listening to The Why Factor on the BBC World Service. I'm Sandra Canthal. You can find more from the BBC's Beyond Fake News season by visiting bbc.com/fake news or join the conversation using the hashtag #BeyondFakeNews. Is your ultimate goal to put yourself out of business?
Yes. I think the dream of most fact-checkers is to not be necessary anymore, that we have a strong enough media and information ecosystem that there isn't such a spread of falsehoods as to need dedicated projects policing them day in and day out.
Okay. I might be in touch later on just to double check some facts and stuff when we get to the script.
Please, I love that part. as you would imagine.